I walked into my husband's tech headquarters, holding two first-class tickets to Paris for Valentine's Day. Instead of surprising him, I stood in the back of a cheering crowd, watching him slip a 5-carat diamond ring onto his billionaire CEO's finger. He kissed her while their employees popped champagne. I did not scream or cry. I simply dropped the tickets in the trash, walked out the doors, and initiated the withdrawal of my $600 million shadow investment in his company. 30 minutes later, my phone showed 10 missed calls and my doorbell rang. My name is Rachel. I am 34 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I believed I had a solid marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever faced a betrayal that forced you to become utterly ruthless to take back your power. The sky over San Francisco was bright blue that afternoon. I parked my car in the visitor lot of Nexus Solutions, the software company my husband Derek co-founded 3 years ago. From the outside, the building was an imposing structure of steel and glass. Derek always boasted about this building, telling anyone who would listen that he was a self-made man who built his empire from the ground up through pure genius. I never corrected him. I never mentioned the blind trust I managed, or that my venture capital firm was the anonymous angel investor holding 85% of his company's preferred equity. I let him have his pride. I stayed in the shadows, letting him play the brilliant chief technology officer while I secured our future. Today was supposed to be a celebration. I clutched a sleek silver envelope containing our flight details and reservations for a suite overlooking the Eiffel Tower. I pushed through the revolving glass doors into the lobby. It was deserted. The reception desk sat empty, and the usual corporate hum of ringing phones was absent. Instead, a loud roar of applause and laughter drifted down the corridor from the central atrium. I frowned, adjusting my leather handbag. I assumed they were throwing a company-wide mixer. Derek had mentioned boosting employee morale ahead of their initial public offering next quarter. I walked quietly down the hallway, my heels clicking softly against the concrete floor. The closer I got, the louder the cheering became. I heard the pop of a champagne cork followed by excited screams. I slipped into the back of the sunlit atrium, standing behind tall decorative plants. Over 100 employees were gathered in a wide circle. In the center stood Derek in a tailored suit. Beside him stood Sloan, the 32-year-old chief executive officer. Sloan wore her arrogance like a designer coat. She constantly bragged about her elite family background, flashing her inherited wealth, and looked down on anyone she deemed beneath her social status. She had always treated me with veiled contempt at corporate dinners, viewing me as an unemployed housewife holding back a visionary like Derek. I watched Derek take a microphone. The room fell into an eager hush. Derek looked at Sloan with an expression of pure adoration that made the air trap in my lungs. "Building this company has been the greatest journey of my life," Derek announced, his voice echoing through the speakers. "But the real success was finding a partner who matches my ambition, a woman who truly understands what it means to build an empire. Sloan, you are my equal in every way." My husband reached into his jacket pocket. The crowd gasped collectively. Derek dropped to one knee, right there on the polished floor of the atrium. He opened a small velvet box, revealing a massive, blinding 5-carat diamond ring. "Sloan, will you marry me?" he asked. Sloan covered her mouth in feigned shock, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Yes!" she practically shrieked into the microphone. "Of course I will!" Derek slid the heavy diamond ring onto her perfectly manicured finger, stood up with a triumphant grin, and pulled her into a deep, passionate kiss. The employees erupted into thunderous applause, raising their champagne flutes high into the air to toast the newly engaged corporate power couple. Time stopped. The space around me seemed to warp and spin in a dizzying circle, isolating me in a vacuum of cold reality. The loud cheers of the employees, the clinking of expensive crystal, the sound of my husband laughing with his mistress, it all faded into a distant, muffled static. I felt completely detached from my own body, watching the scene unfold from a million miles away. The man I had shared my bed with for years, the man whose company I had secretly funded and protected, had just proposed to another woman in broad daylight. There was no rage in that exact second. There was no sudden urge to run forward, throw my drink in their faces, and cause a massive, humiliating public scene. I felt a chilling, absolute silence settle over my mind. I looked down at the silver envelope in my hand. The meticulously planned romantic trip to Paris, the celebration of our marriage. Without uttering a single word or shedding a single tear, I slowly turned away from the cheering, oblivious crowd. I walked over to a sleek, chrome trash receptacle near the exit. I dropped the expensive envelope inside, letting it fall aimlessly among the discarded paper coffee cups and crumpled paper napkins. I pushed through the heavy front glass doors, stepping back out into the cold, sharp winter air, fully ready to burn his entire arrogant world straight to the ground. I was no longer a wife. I was an investor executing a hostile takeover of my own completely shattered life. I reached my black SUV in the visitor parking lot. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and closed out the noise of the city. The leather was freezing against my skin, but I felt absolutely nothing. I did not waste a single second shedding tears over a man who had just publicly humiliated me. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, matching the quiet, calculated fury running through my veins. I pulled my phone from my bag and dialed the elite concierge line at my bank. The representative answered immediately, recognizing my private account status. I instructed him to cancel the 2 first-class tickets to Paris and the luxury suite reservation overlooking the Eiffel Tower. Then I issued the next directive. I ordered the bank to freeze all supplementary credit cards attached to my primary accounts immediately. Derek had been using those exact cards to fund his lavish lifestyle for 3 past years. He truly enjoyed playing the role of the self-made tech mogul, but every expensive dinner, every tailored suit, and every luxury car lease was quietly backed by my premium accounts. The representative confirmed the freeze was active. I hung up the phone. Macro lens. The camera focuses tightly on my index finger as I press the confirm button on my banking application, instantly locking down millions in available credit and severing Derek from his financial lifeblood. Next, I dialed Jamal. He was my 38-year-old brother-in-law, an African-American man married to my older sister, Audrey. Jamal was a ruthless elite corporate lawyer based in Manhattan. He was also the only person on Earth who knew I was the anonymous founder of the blind trust that had bankrolled Nexus Solutions. He managed the complex legal firewall that kept my identity entirely hidden from Derek Sloan and the rest of the corporate world. Jamal answered on the first ring, expecting a standard update. "We have a massive breach," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Derek just proposed to Sloan in the middle of the company atrium." Jamal let out a sharp breath. A harsh, cynical chuckle echoed over the line. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" I watched him put a 5-carat diamond ring on her finger. "Using company time," I replied. The entire office was cheering for them. "Say the word," Jamal said, his tone instantly shifting into pure lethal professionalism. "Activate the redemption clause," I ordered. "Pull my 85% equity out of Nexus Solutions. Liquidate the preferred shares and withdraw all the capital. Do it right now." "That is a $600 million withdrawal," Rachel Jamal warned, though I could clearly hear the aggressive keystrokes of him already pulling up the trust documents on his end. "Taking that much liquidity out instantly will paralyze their entire operations by tomorrow morning. It will trigger an immediate default on their server hosting agreements, freeze their vendor payments, and completely bounce their employee payroll. The company will bleed out in hours." "I am fully aware of the financial consequences," I said. "Burn it to the ground." "Consider it done," Jamal replied, and the line went dead. I shifted the heavy SUV into gear and pulled out of the visitor lot. The drive back to our upscale suburban neighborhood took exactly 45 minutes. I navigated the familiar city streets with absolute unwavering precision. My mind was a steel trap, coldly calculating every financial angle, every legal repercussion, and every devastating blow I was about to deliver. By the time I pulled into the wide driveway of our sprawling modern estate, the ripple effect of my actions had already begun to strike. I walked through the heavy front door and dropped my keys on the console table. The house was perfectly quiet. I walked into the pristine kitchen and set my phone down on the cold marble island. Instantly, the screen lit up with an automated fraud alert from my bank. A transaction for $4,000 had been violently declined at Le Bernardin, the most exclusive luxury restaurant in the city. Derek was trying to buy Sloane a lavish engagement dinner using my money. 10 seconds later, a second alert popped up on the screen. A charge for $800 at a high-end champagne lounge was denied due to insufficient authorization. I watched the glowing screen as a third notification appeared. It was a frantic attempt to withdraw $2,000 from an ATM. Denied. The financial guillotine had dropped perfectly. Derek was currently sitting in a five-star restaurant with his new billionaire fiancée, completely unable to pay the massive bill. He was rapidly realizing that his limitless black card was suddenly a useless piece of plastic. My phone vibrated violently against the marble countertop. The caller ID flashed Derek's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. A barrage of text messages flooded my notification center. Rachel, answer the phone. My card is declining everywhere. Call the bank right now and fix this glitch. This is humiliating. I ignored every single word. The phone continued to ring. I stood perfectly still watching his frantic attempts to reach me. 1 missed call, 2 missed calls, 5 missed calls, 8 missed calls. He was fully panicking. The arrogant man who thought he ruled the corporate world was currently sweating in a luxury dining room, frantically dialing the wife he had just publicly betrayed. Exactly 10 missed calls registered on the display before the ringing finally ceased. He had given up trying to call and was likely rushing back here to demand answers. He probably thought the bank had made a massive administrative error. He had absolutely no idea that his company was currently hemorrhaging $600 million in capital or that his entire corporate empire was bleeding out onto the boardroom floor. I walked over to the custom wine fridge built into the kitchen cabinetry. I pulled out a bottle of expensive red wine we had been saving for a very special occasion. Today was undeniably a special occasion. I selected a heavy crystal glass from the upper cabinet, popped the cork with a swift motion, and poured a generous amount of the dark red liquid. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The taste was rich, complex, and deeply satisfying. I walked slowly into the expansive living room, my heels echoing in the quiet, empty space. The large windows offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the manicured front lawn and the dark street beyond. I stood quietly by the stone fireplace, waiting. I knew exactly what was about to happen. I had orchestrated every single detail. Tires screeched loudly in the distance. A luxury sports car turned aggressively onto my street and sped toward the house. It swerved violently into the driveway, slamming on the brakes. Car doors opened and slammed shut with tremendous force. Angry, overlapping voices carried clearly through the crisp evening air. I took another calm sip of my wine, feeling my heartbeat remain perfectly steady. The heavy brass doorbell rang aggressively, the sound echoing through the massive house like a warning alarm. Someone began pounding on the thick wooden front door with a closed fist. The real war was about to begin, and I was holding all the ammunition. I walked to the front entrance. The heavy pounding continued echoing off the high ceilings of the massive foyer. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Derek stood on the porch, his face flushed deep red with intense rage. His silk tie was loosened, and his expensive designer jacket hung open against the freezing wind. Beside him stood Sloane, shivering slightly, in a plunging silk evening dress, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Standing just behind them, glaring at me with her usual expression of absolute disdain, was Patricia, my 62-year-old mother-in-law. Derek stormed past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Sloane and Patricia followed closely behind him, bringing the biting winter cold inside with them. "Call the bank right now!" Derek shouted, his voice vibrating loudly in the quiet house. He threw his useless black credit card onto the console table. It skidded across the polished wood and hit a decorative vase. "You messed up the account payments again. Every single card declined at the restaurant. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" We were in front of the entire executive board and top-tier investors. I closed the front door slowly. The heavy lock clicked into place. I turned to face them, keeping my grip steady on my wine glass. I took a deliberate sip, letting the tense silence stretch between us. "Are you deaf?" Patricia snapped, stepping forward. Her heavy, expensive perfume filled the foyer, suffocating and overly sweet. "My son is speaking to you. You sit around this house all day doing absolutely nothing, and you cannot even manage a simple bank transfer correctly. Fix it immediately." We left a table full of highly important guests, waiting for us to return. "The bank flagged the accounts for fraud," Derek explained, aggressively running a hand through his hair. "They locked everything down. I had to leave my Rolex as collateral with the restaurant manager, just so they would let us leave to come sort this out. Call your private wealth manager and authorize the release. Tell them it was a glitch. Tell them my wife is incompetent and made a filing error." Sloane sighed dramatically, looking around my foyer with obvious distaste. She checked her reflection in the large entryway mirror, holding up her left hand to admire the massive 5-carat diamond sparkling under the chandelier. "This is exactly why you need to outsource your domestic management, Derek," she said, her voice dripping with elitist condescension. "Relying on someone who clearly lacks basic financial literacy is a massive liability to your reputation. We have institutional investors flying in tomorrow morning. I cannot have my chief technology officer looking like a broke amateur because his unemployed wife forgot to pay the credit card bill. Call the bank, Rachel. Stop wasting our time." I stood my ground, my expression entirely neutral. I took another slow sip of my wine. The vintage was exceptionally good tonight. I watched them unravel, completely blind to the true danger they were standing in. "Rachel, move," Derek demanded, stepping aggressively into my personal space. He pointed a sharp finger directly at my face. "I do not have time for your pathetic silent treatment. Get on the phone right now. Sloane and I have an engagement party to get back to, and my mother is freezing. Fix the cards, or I swear I will pack your bags myself." Patricia crossed her arms, looking me up and down with pure disgust. "You are completely useless," she muttered. "My son works 80 hours a week building a tech empire, providing this luxurious roof over your head, and you cannot even handle a simple administrative task. You are an embarrassment to this family. Dial the number." I let her words hang in the air. For years, I had endured Patricia's constant verbal abuse. I had allowed her to treat me like a gold digger, a freeloader who had latched onto her brilliant son. I had smiled through clenched teeth at every holiday dinner while she praised Derek's genius and openly mocked my lack of a visible career. I had done it to protect the blind trust, to protect the massive financial structure I had built to ensure our future. But that future was entirely dead now. "There is no glitch," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and utterly devoid of warmth. Derek froze. His hand dropped slowly to his side. His brows furrowed in aggressive confusion. "What did you just say?" "I said there is no glitch," I repeated, locking my eyes directly onto his. "The accounts are functioning exactly as I instructed them to. I called the bank. I ordered the security freeze. Every single supplementary card in your wallet is permanently deactivated." Patricia gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest in theatrical shock. "You did what? Have you completely lost your mind? You are trying to control my son's money. How dare you?" "It is not his money, Patricia," I replied coldly, shifting my gaze to the older woman. "It has never been his money. Every supplementary card in his pocket is tethered directly to my primary accounts. I simply shut off the tap. Your son is entirely cut off." Derek stared at me, his anger briefly giving way to utter panic. "Why would you do that? You know, tonight is crucial. The board is throwing this dinner to celebrate the engagement. It is a massive networking event for the upcoming IPO. We need this capital to secure our launch. You are ruining months of careful planning." He was still trying to play the game. He actually thought I did not know the truth. He firmly believed he could still control the narrative, manipulate the situation, and keep me completely in the dark. He viewed me as a pawn on his chessboard, a naive, trusting wife who existed solely to facilitate his grand ambitions. "I know exactly what tonight is," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, chilling whisper. I was in the corporate atrium today, Derek. I stood in the very back of the room. I brought you first-class tickets to Paris for Valentine's Day. I was going to surprise you. Instead, I watched you drop to one knee and slide a diamond ring onto Sloane's finger. The color instantly drained from Derek's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He took a stumbling step backward, suddenly realizing the massive, catastrophic reality of the situation. His secret life was entirely exposed. The glass castle he had built was shattering around him, and I was the one holding the hammer. Sloane stopped admiring her reflection in the mirror. She turned to look at me, her posture stiffening defensively. The arrogant smirk vanished from her lips, replaced by a sudden flash of profound uncertainty. Patricia stepped between us, her face twisting into a furious, panicked scowl. She opened her mouth to scream at me, ready to launch into a vicious defense of her son's infidelity. But before she could utter a single word, Derek lunged forward, desperately trying to salvage his crumbling empire. He threw his hands up in a placating gesture, his breathing heavy and erratic. He plastered a frantic, pleading smile onto his face. It was the exact kind of smile he used when cornering a hesitant investor during a tough funding pitch. "Rachel, you are completely misunderstanding the situation," he said, his voice dropping into a smooth, practiced cadence. "You are taking what you saw entirely out of context. It is not what it looked like at all." I raised an eyebrow. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my wine. "Please, Derek," I said. "Explain the context of you sliding a 5-carat diamond ring onto another woman's finger while your entire staff applauded." I am absolutely fascinated to hear this brilliant explanation. He stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back instantly, my eyes warning him to keep his distance. He dropped his hands, swallowing hard. "It was a PR stunt," he blurted out. The words tumbled from his mouth in a desperate, rapid rush. "A complete fabrication. The board of directors forced us into it." Sloane nodded quickly, catching on to his improvised script. She straightened her posture, recovering some of her typical haughty arrogance. "Exactly," she added, stepping up beside him. "It is corporate theater, nothing more. You simply do not understand how high-level business operates, Rachel." Derek grabbed onto her validation like a drowning man clutching a life preserver. "The IPO is weeks away, Rachel. The market is incredibly volatile right now. We needed a massive media narrative to drive up the initial valuation. A high-profile tech romance between the founders creates buzz. It secures headlines. The venture capitalists eat this kind of narrative alive. It was purely a strategic business decision to ensure the company launches at maximum capacity. We are just playing a role for the press and the shareholders." "Patricia." My mother-in-law let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief. She placed a jeweled hand over her heart. "Oh, thank goodness," she exclaimed, looking at me with renewed vicious disdain. "See how utterly ridiculous you are being. My son is working himself to the bone to secure your financial future, executing brilliant corporate strategies, and you fly into a hysterical, jealous rage over a basic marketing tactic. You are acting like a crazy person. Turn the credit cards back on immediately and apologize to your husband for this embarrassing tantrum." I looked at the three of them. They stood shoulder to shoulder in my foyer, forming a unified wall of deception. Derek looked genuinely convinced that his improvised lie was working. He actually believed his own gaslighting. He thought he could manipulate my perception of reality just as he had done for the past 3 years. He expected me to nod blindly, apologize for my foolish insecurity, and hand over the keys to the kingdom without another word. I set my wine glass down on the console table. The sharp clink of crystal against wood shattered the tense silence in the hallway. "A PR stunt," I repeated slowly, letting the words roll off my tongue with biting sarcasm. "Corporate theater designed to drive up investor interest." "That is a truly fascinating strategy, Derek. I am sure the board of directors was absolutely thrilled with this brilliant marketing initiative." They were. Derek insisted, gaining confidence from my seemingly calm demeanor. "It was a unanimous vote. We had to execute the proposal today to meet the press release deadlines for the major tech blogs. You have to understand, Rachel, everything I do is for us, for our future. I would never betray you like that. You are my wife. I reached into the deep pocket of my tailored trousers. My fingers brushed against a neatly folded piece of paper. Jamal had pulled the file less than an hour ago, bypassing the standard corporate firewalls, using his highest level clearance as my legal proxy. I pulled the document out and unfolded it with slow, deliberate precision. The crisp sound of the heavy stock paper seemed exceptionally loud in the quiet space. "If this was a board-approved PR stunt," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register, "then you must have filed the necessary expense reports for the corporate props." Derek froze. His confident smile slipped, replaced by a sudden sharp look of apprehension. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice losing its smooth, persuasive cadence. I stepped forward and dropped the printed bank statement onto the polished wood of the console table. It landed right next to his useless, deactivated black credit card. "I am talking about the ring, Derek," I said, tapping the paper with my index finger. The massive, blinding diamond currently sitting on Sloane's left hand. If this was a corporate marketing stunt, the company would have leased the jewelry or at least expensed it through the public relations budget under promotional materials. Instead, this official bank statement shows a direct, unapproved wire transfer of $150,000. Sloane looked down at the document, her eyes widening in genuine panic. Patricia leaned forward, squinting at the highlighted numbers on the page, clearly struggling to comprehend the financial reality crashing down around them. "You used $150,000 from the company's primary operating fund to buy that ring," I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings like a gavel strike. "You did not expense it. You did not lease it. You authorized a direct wire transfer from the payroll holding account to a luxury diamond broker in the Diamond District. You embezzled corporate funds to buy an engagement ring for your mistress." Derek stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. His chest heaved. He looked wildly at Sloane, then back at me. He was completely trapped. The undeniable, documented proof of his financial crime was sitting right in front of him. There was no PR stunt. There was no board approval. There was only a narcissistic man who thought he was entirely untouchable. "Where did you get that?" Derek demanded. His voice was a harsh, raspy whisper. His hands curled into tight fists at his sides, the veins bulging against his skin. "That is a classified internal ledger. You do not have the clearance to access that kind of financial data. Who gave that to you?" I ignored his frantic questioning. I kept my gaze locked on his panicked eyes. "You stole $150,000 from the very accounts needed to keep your servers running and your employees paid." I continued, driving the knife deeper with every word. "You committed blatant financial fraud to fund your personal fantasy. And you actually thought you could walk in here, scream at me about a bank glitch, and gaslight me into believing a pathetic lie about corporate theater." Sloane took a sharp step away from Derek. She looked down at the massive diamond on her finger, suddenly realizing it was not a symbol of their victorious love, but a glowing beacon of felony embezzlement. The arrogance she had worn just moments ago completely evaporated. She was the CEO of the company. She was legally responsible for the operating funds. If the money was missing, she would be held just as accountable as Derek for the missing capital. "You told me you bought this with your personal bonus," Sloane hissed at Derek. Her voice was shrill, laced with absolute terror. "You told me you liquidated some of your early stock options. If the board finds out you touched the operating fund right before an IPO, they will crucify us both. We will face federal investigations." "They already know," I said, delivering the final crushing blow for this particular battle. "I made sure the internal auditing team received an anonymous copy of that exact ledger 10 minutes before you arrived at my door. The board is not waiting for your IPO, Derek. They are currently calling emergency legal counsel to figure out how to handle their chief technology officer stealing 6 figures from the company vault." Derek stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the heavy front door. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff, free falling into absolute nothingness, desperately grasping at the empty air. His breathing turned into rapid, shallow gasps. The illusion of his brilliance, his control, and his entire self-made empire was burning to the ground right in front of his eyes. Sloane stared at Derek for a long, heavy moment. Her sharp eyes darted between his pale, panicked face and the damning bank ledger sitting on the polished wood of my console table. The silence in the foyer was absolute, broken only by the sound of Derek taking rapid, shallow breaths. I watched the gears turning in Sloane's head. She was a woman born into immense unearned wealth, shielded by a lifetime of extreme privilege and high society connections. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the harsh reality of corporate embezzlement had genuinely terrified her. But as she turned her gaze back to me, standing perfectly calm with my wine glass, her terror rapidly evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a vicious, overwhelming arrogance. She adamantly refused to be intimidated by someone she considered entirely beneath her social station. Sloane let out a loud, dismissive laugh. She reached up and casually pushed a strand of expensive blonde hair behind her ear, completely dropping the panicked facade. "Is that what this is all about?" Sloane asked, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. $150,000. You are throwing a hysterical, pathetic fit over literal pocket change. Arc shot. The camera begins a slow, continuous orbit around the grand foyer, capturing the shifting power dynamic as Sloane confidently steps away from the front door and begins to pace across the marble floor. The rotating angle emphasizes her haughty, aggressive posture and the absolute disdain radiating from her face as she zeroes in on me while Derek cowers in the background. Sloane stopped pacing and turned to face me squarely. She lifted her left hand deliberately, flashing the massive 5-carat diamond under the bright crystal chandelier. "Let us drop the corporate theater, Rachel. You want the truth? Here is the absolute, unfiltered truth. Derek and I have been sleeping together for 2 solid years. We did not just start this relationship today. We have shared luxury hotel rooms across 3 different continents. We have spent countless late nights in the office planning our life together, while you were sitting in this suburban prison waiting for him to come home. He stopped being yours a very long time ago." I did not blink. I did not move. I let her harsh words hit the air and fall completely flat against my iron composure. Derek shifted uncomfortably against the heavy front door. He seemed simultaneously relieved that Sloane was taking charge of the narrative and terrified of what she was loudly admitting on the record. Patricia, however, seemed to suddenly find her courage again. She stood taller, nodding along with Sloane's brutal confession with obvious approval. "You actually thought a visionary man like Derek could spend his life tethered to someone like you?" Sloane continued, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the stone floor. "Look at yourself. You have no career. You have no drive. You have absolutely zero understanding of what it takes to build a legacy in the modern financial world. Derek is a genius. He is changing the landscape of global technology. And what exactly do you do, Rachel? You arrange throw pillows and wait for your monthly allowance." I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the rich flavor completely unaffected by her venom. Her profound ignorance was highly entertaining. "You are an uneducated, unemployed freeloader," Sloane spat, taking a threatening step closer to me. Her eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. "You contribute absolutely nothing to his life or his success. You are a parasite draining his energy. Derek needs a partner who can navigate executive boardrooms, negotiate with venture capitalists, and command respect. He does not need a dependent wife who panics over a simple bank statement. I have elevated him. I introduced him to the elite investors. I brought him into social circles you could not even buy your way into. I am the reason Nexus Solutions is about to launch a $1 billion initial public offering." Sloane paused, looking around my immaculate foyer with a sneer of profound disgust. "You should be thanking me down on your knees," she added, her voice echoing loudly off the high walls. "Without my family's connections and my brilliant corporate leadership, Derek would still be writing code in a cramped rented basement. Instead, he is a highly respected chief technology officer. I gave him the world. You just held him back." Patricia eagerly stepped forward to join the verbal execution. "Sloane is absolutely right," my mother-in-law declared, her voice harsh and completely unapologetic. "I told Derek from the very beginning that marrying you was a catastrophic mistake. You lack pedigree. You lack basic ambition. You have spent the last 7 years acting like a leech, sucking the life out of my brilliant son. Sloane brings real power to this family. She comes from a lineage of actual wealth and influence. What do you bring? Absolutely nothing. You are a dead weight dragging him down into mediocrity. I stood perfectly still, letting their combined insults wash over me. It was truly poetic. They were standing inside a luxury estate I owned entirely, discussing a tech company I had secretly built and funded from the ground up, and calling me a useless freeloader. The sheer magnitude of their delusion was breathtaking. Sloane crossed her arms tightly, a triumphant smirk returning to her flawless face. "So you found an internal bank ledger," she said, shrugging her shoulders as if brushing off a minor inconvenience. "Do you really think 150 grand matters to me? I can write a personal check to cover the operating fund tomorrow morning before the board even sits down for their morning coffee. My family spends that kind of money on weekend ski trips to Aspen. You think exposing this minor discrepancy will destroy us? You are incredibly naive, Rachel. Wealth protects wealth. The board will gladly look the other way when I pump another 10 million into the capital reserves." Derek visibly relaxed at Sloane's bold declaration. His panicked breathing finally slowed. He pushed himself off the wooden door, suddenly emboldened by the shield of Sloane's inherited money. He adjusted his tailored jacket, desperately trying to regain his posture as the dominant male figure in the room. "You heard her," Rachel. Derek said, his voice regaining a fraction of its usual arrogant edge. "Sloane can make this minor accounting issue disappear instantly. You thought you had me trapped, but you severely underestimated who you are dealing with. Sloane is an absolute powerhouse. You are just a bitter, jealous ex-wife trying to cause a desperate scene because you cannot handle the fact that I upgraded to someone better." Sloane laughed, a sharp metallic sound that grated against the walls. "We are done playing nice with you, Rachel. We are done hiding in the shadows. You wanted the truth out in the open, and now you have it. Derek and I are getting married. We are taking the company public. We are going to be a Silicon Valley power couple, and you are going to be a forgotten footnote in his biography." I looked at Sloane. I looked at the massive diamond gleaming brightly on her finger. I looked at Derek, who was foolishly hiding behind the skirt of a woman who had absolutely no idea she was steering a rapidly sinking ship. "If you are quite finished giving your motivational speech," I said quietly, keeping my tone deadly and precise. Sloane glared at me, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "You really are pathetic," she sneered. "You stand there drinking wine while your entire life falls apart. You have no money, you have no job, you have no husband. You have absolutely zero leverage here. Accept your defeat and walk away before we decide to crush you completely." I swirled the dark red wine in my crystal glass. I met Sloane's arrogant gaze with a look of absolute, unwavering, lethal intent. They had proudly laid all their cards on the table. They had admitted to the affair. They had mocked my worth. They had cemented their own graves. Now it was finally time to drop the remaining dirt on their coffins. Patricia stepped out from behind her son. The heavy scent of her cloying designer perfume preceded her like a toxic cloud. She looked energized, her chest puffed out with a vicious sort of maternal pride. Watching Sloane humiliate me had clearly invigorated her. She adjusted her expensive pearl necklace, a gift Derek had bought her, using my supplementary accounts last Christmas, and glared at me with absolute undisguised hatred. "You heard the woman?" Patricia snapped, her voice shrill and grating. "The charade is completely over, Rachel. We are entirely done pretending you have any value to this family." Patricia opened her oversized genuine leather tote bag. She dug her manicured hands inside and aggressively pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal documents. She slapped the heavy pile of papers onto the marble console table right next to the damning bank statement and Derek's useless credit card. "These are standard separation and divorce papers," Patricia announced, tapping the top page with her sharp acrylic fingernail. "Derek had his corporate lawyers draft them up 2 weeks ago. They are incredibly generous considering you contributed absolutely nothing to his financial success. You will sign them tonight. You will not contest a single clause. You will take the meager alimony offered, and you will quietly disappear from my son's life forever." I looked down at the legal documents. Derek had actually paid lawyers to draft a divorce settlement while I was planning a romantic getaway to Paris. He lacked the basic courage to hand them to me himself, cowardly relying on his mother to act as his messenger. I did not reach for the papers. I kept my hands perfectly still, my eyes locked on Patricia's furious face. "You really think I'm going to sign anything you put in front of me?" I asked, my tone dangerously quiet. "You will sign them because you have no other viable choice," Patricia spat, taking a menacing step closer. "Look at Sloane. Look at her Rachel. She is everything a man of Derek's elite caliber deserves. She is sophisticated. She is highly educated in global finance. She possesses a social pedigree that you could not even begin to comprehend. Her family practically owns half of the luxury real estate in this city." When Derek attends the annual galas at the country club, Sloane is a trophy that commands absolute respect. When he brings you, he looks like he is running a charity program for the socially inept. Derek shifted his weight, smirking slightly at his mother's ruthless tirade. He crossed his arms over his chest, clearly enjoying watching me endure this verbal execution. Sloane stood tall, lifting her chin, basking in the glow of Patricia's extreme flattery. "I warned Derek the very day he brought you home." Patricia continued, her voice rising in volume, echoing harshly against the stone walls of my foyer. "I told him you were a massive liability. You had no family wealth. You had no elite connections. You were just a basic, uninspiring girl who latched onto a man with a brilliant, visionary mind. I told him you would act as a heavy anchor drowning his potential. I spent 7 agonizing years watching you drag my son down into suburban mediocrity." "And Sloane is the solution to this mediocrity?" I asked calmly. "Sloane is his salvation," Patricia declared fiercely. "Sloane's father is a billionaire tycoon. Her social circle consists of venture capitalists, political figures, and hedge fund managers. She brings real, tangible power to the table. With Sloane by his side, Derek is going to become an absolute titan in the tech industry. They are going to grace the covers of major financial magazines. They are going to build a dynasty." Patricia leaned in her face, contorting into an ugly, vicious sneer. "What exactly do you bring to the table, Rachel? You bring dead weight. You bring boring, pathetic domesticity. You bring nothing but an empty bank account and a staggering lack of ambition. You were merely a starter wife, a temporary placeholder, while Derek built his empire and found someone truly worthy of his status." I absorbed every single venomous word. I did not flinch. I did not show a fraction of an ounce of emotional pain. I simply filed away her brutal admissions, building a flawless mental record of her profound greed. "So you knew about the affair?" I stated, presenting the question directly to Patricia. "You knew he was sleeping with his CEO behind my back for 2 years?" Patricia laughed. It was a cold, cruel, completely unapologetic sound. "Of course I knew. I actively encouraged it. I told Derek he needed to align himself with power. I hosted them for private dinners at my house while you thought Derek was working late at the office. I helped Sloane pick out the catering menu for the engagement party you ruined tonight. I did everything in my power to ensure my son secured a woman of absolute top-tier quality." The sheer audacity of her confession was staggering. My mother-in-law had actively facilitated the destruction of my marriage because she desperately craved access to a billionaire lifestyle. She viewed her own son as a financial asset to be traded to the highest bidder, and she viewed me as a worthless obstacle standing in the way of her grand social climbing ambitions. "You should be grateful we are even offering you a settlement," Patricia sneered, pointing a sharp finger at the divorce papers. "If you try to fight us in court, Derek's legal team will absolutely annihilate you. They will bury you in legal fees until you are begging for spare change on the street. Sloane's family has an army of ruthless corporate sharks on retainer. You are completely out of your league. Take the pen, sign your name, and get out of our sight." I looked at the pen resting on top of the documents. I looked at Patricia, whose chest was heaving with the exertion of her malicious rant. I looked at Sloane, who was smiling triumphantly, and finally at Derek, who was watching me with an expression of supreme, arrogant confidence. They genuinely believed they had won. They firmly believed that their combined wealth, their social status, and their cruel intimidation tactics had successfully forced me into submission. I reached out and picked up the expensive metal pen. Derek's smirk widened. Sloane let out a quiet sigh of victory. Patricia crossed her arms, nodding in aggressive satisfaction as she watched me hold the writing instrument. They were absolutely certain I was about to surrender my life to them. Instead of signing these papers, I calmly snapped the pen in half. Ink sprayed across the pristine white pages of Derek's generous settlement offer. I dropped the broken pieces onto the mess, staining the legal documents permanently. Patricia shrieked, jumping backward to avoid the black ink. "What is wrong with you?" she yelled. I met her furious gaze with absolute unyielding coldness. "I am not signing anything I stated." Derek stepped forward, his brief moment of victory shattering. "You are going to sign them, Rachel," he growled, dropping all pretense of civility. "You do not have a choice. I am completely done playing nice with you." He puffed out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me in my own hallway. He pointed sharply toward the front door. "This house is owned by my corporate real estate management company," he barked, delivering what he firmly believed to be the ultimate devastating kill shot. "You have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and get out. If you are not gone by tomorrow night, I will have you physically removed from the premises." The threat hung heavily in the air. Derek, Sloane, and Patricia stood together, fully expecting me to crumble into a sobbing, broken mess. They expected me to beg for mercy. They expected me to desperately negotiate for a few more days to find a cheap apartment. I smiled. It was a sharp, terrifying predator's smile. I let the silence stretch out, allowing their false sense of absolute victory to reach its absolute peak before I completely destroyed it. "You are right, Derek," I said softly. "A corporate management company does indeed own this house. But did you ever bother to read the fine print to see exactly who owns that company?" Derek blinked. The aggressive, towering posture he had assumed just seconds prior suddenly faltered. He uncrossed his arms, letting them drop limply to his sides. A harsh, forced laugh erupted from his chest, sounding entirely hollow in the expansive, high-ceilinged foyer. He looked back at Sloane, attempting to share a condescending joke that completely failed to land. "What kind of pathetic bluff is this?" Derek demanded. He turned his attention back to me, his voice pitching higher with sudden, unexplainable anxiety. "I set up Horizon Real Estate Holdings myself. I filed the incorporation paperwork. I signed the property deed with my own 2 hands. I know exactly who owns this house, Rachel. My name is on the bottom line of the master lease agreement. I am the sole proprietor of this estate." "Your name is on a master lease," I corrected smoothly, maintaining my unwavering icy gaze. "A lease makes you a tenant. A lease makes you an occupant. It does not make you a proprietor. Horizon Real Estate Holdings is merely a shell corporation. It is a secondary subsidiary designed specifically to manage the landscaping bills, the property taxes, and the general maintenance of this suburban estate. It holds absolutely zero equity in the physical property." Patricia scoffed loudly, waving her jeweled hand in the air with profound irritation. "Stop talking in circles," she barked, her face turning a bright, angry shade of red. "You are just trying to confuse my son with legal jargon you probably read in a cheap magazine." "Derek, do not listen to a single word she says. She is stalling for time because she knows she is entirely defeated. Call the local authorities and have her removed right now." Sloane, however, did not echo Patricia's blind, arrogant confidence. As the CEO of a major tech firm, she understood corporate structuring perfectly well. She understood the highly dangerous implications of a subsidiary shell company operating a real estate asset. Her eyes narrowed sharply. She took a distinct step away from Patricia, looking at Derek with profound, escalating scrutiny. "Derek," Sloane said, her voice dropping to an urgent, demanding whisper, "who funded Horizon Real Estate Holdings? When we consolidated your personal assets last month before the initial public offering audit, who provided the capital for this specific property acquisition?" Derek swallowed hard. A bead of sweat formed at his temple despite the freezing winter draft rushing in from the front door. "It was our primary investor," he replied defensively, his voice losing all its previous bravado. "The angel investor who backed Nexus Solutions during our initial seed funding round. They offered to secure my personal real estate to ensure I remained focused entirely on building the software infrastructure. It is a standard executive perk. Exactly, I stated, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing like a ticking clock counting down to his destruction. The angel investor provided the capital. The angel investor holds the deed. Horizon Real Estate Holdings simply pays the municipal water bill on behalf of the parent organization, and the parent organization is Vanguard Capital Trust. Sloan gasped. It was not a theatrical, exaggerated gasp like Patricia's earlier performance. It was a sharp, jagged intake of air born of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood violently rushed from her face, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking stark and unnatural against her suddenly pale skin. She recognized the name immediately. Everyone in their corporate boardroom knew that specific name. Vanguard Capital Trust. Sloan repeated, her voice trembling violently. She looked at Derek as if he had just handed her a live explosive device. Derek, Vanguard Capital Trust holds 85% of our preferred equity. They are the sole reason we have the liquidity to launch the IPO next quarter. They own the entire financial framework of our company. I am fully aware of who our primary investor is. Sloan. Derek snapped, his panic rapidly morphing into defensive, cornered rage. He glared at me, his chest heaving with exertion. What is your point, Rachel? Are you going to call our angel investor and complain about our marriage? You think a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm cares about the domestic squabbles of their chief technology officer? They care about profit margins. They care about the IPO launch. They do not care about a discarded housewife throwing a temper tantrum in the suburbs. You still do not see it, I said, shaking my head with cold, absolute amusement. You consider yourself a visionary genius, yet you are completely blind to the very foundation you stand on. Vanguard Capital Trust is a blind trust. It is a highly secured private financial vehicle designed specifically to protect the identity of its sole founder and primary beneficiary. Derek stepped forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, preparing to launch another verbal assault. Stop bluffing. You have absolutely no connection to Vanguard Capital. You do not even understand how a blind trust operates. You spent the last 7 years picking out curtains and cooking dinner while I built an empire. You are nothing. You possess zero leverage here. Patricia stepped up beside her son, her face twisted in pure malice. Call the police, Derek, she demanded aggressively, pulling her cell phone from her designer handbag. She is having a full psychotic break. She is completely delusional. Have the authorities forcibly remove her from the property right now. I refuse to stand here and listen to these insane fabrications for another second. I know how a blind trust operates because I built it, I stated, raising my voice just enough to easily slice through Patricia's shrill demands. I established Vanguard Capital Trust exactly 5 years ago. I channeled my private family inheritance into that fund. I hired elite corporate proxies to manage the daily operations to ensure you never saw my name on a single term sheet. I funded your initial seed round. I paid for your server space. I paid for your office lease. I funded the very ground you are standing on right now. Derek froze completely. His eyes darted frantically across my face, searching desperately for a crack in my composure, searching for any sign that I was fabricating this nightmare. He found nothing but absolute ruthless certainty. The arrogant tech mogul was rapidly realizing that he was nothing more than a puppet, and I had been holding his strings from the very beginning. That is mathematically impossible. Sloan interjected, her voice shaking uncontrollably as she stared at the diamond ring she now realized was bought with my money. Vanguard Capital is managed by one of the most aggressive corporate law firms in Manhattan. We deal directly with their senior partner. We negotiate our term sheets exclusively with him. You negotiate with my legal proxy, I corrected sharply, watching her entire world crumble. You report your earnings to my representative. You beg for capital injections from my legal counsel. Derek shook his head violently, physically refusing to accept the catastrophic reality crashing down on his head. No. No, I know the senior partner at that firm. I have spoken to him countless times. He is a ruthless, unyielding shark. He would never take orders from someone like you. You are lying. You are completely making this up to save yourself from being thrown out on the street. I assure you, Derek, she is not lying. The deep, commanding voice echoed from the hallway leading to my private home office. Derek, Sloane, and Patricia all snapped their heads toward the sound, their eyes widening in absolute horror as the true reality of their situation finally stepped out of the shadows. Jamal stepped into the warm light of the foyer. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal pinstripe suit, holding a thick, black leather briefcase. Jamal was a 38-year-old corporate lawyer and my sister Audrey's husband. To Derek and Sloane, he was the ruthless senior partner at the Manhattan firm controlling Vanguard Capital Trust. He was the shark they feared. Derek stumbled backward. His arrogant posture collapsed into pure physical shock. He stared at Jamal like a ghost. He had sat across boardroom tables from him for 3 years, sweating through intense financial interrogations, trying to impress the man holding the keys to his company funding. He never connected the dots that the terrifying corporate lawyer was married to my sister. Sloane covered her mouth with her manicured hand. The massive stolen diamond caught the chandelier light. She let out a sharp gasp. Her eyes darted wildly between Jamal and me, the horrific realization sinking into her privileged brain. The man she had been trying to impress to secure the initial public offering was defending me. "Good evening, Derek," Jamal said, his deep voice slicing through the heavy silence. "Good evening, Sloane. I see you brought the executive team to my client's private residence. It is a bold move considering the financial breach you committed this afternoon." Patricia looked utterly confused. She glanced frantically between her son and this imposing arrival. "Derek, who is this man?" she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "Tell him to leave before I call the police." Jamal did not look at Patricia. He kept his calculating gaze fixed firmly on Derek. He walked gracefully toward the marble console table. He placed his heavy leather briefcase down next to the damning bank ledger and the deactivated credit card. The metallic click of the briefcase latches opening sounded like a firing squad. "This man," Derek whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "This is the senior managing partner representing Vanguard Capital. He controls our investment firm. He controls my blind trust," I corrected sharply, ensuring the absolute truth hit Derek squarely in the chest. "Jamal is my brother-in-law. He is also the legal executor of my financial estate. I pay his firm a generous retainer to manage my wealth and keep men like you completely in the dark." Jamal reached into the briefcase. He pulled out a stack of heavily notarized legal documents. He set them neatly on the marble surface. He smoothed his tie, looking down at Derek with a mixture of professional disgust and personal contempt. "Rachel instructed me to pull the corporate veil back tonight," Jamal stated calmly. "Let us clarify the legal ownership of this estate. Horizon Real Estate Holdings owns this property. However, Horizon is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Capital Trust. Vanguard Capital Trust was solely founded, funded, and is directed by Rachel. She holds 100% of the voting rights. You hold 0. Derek shook his head in frantic denial. "No, that cannot be right. I signed a master lease agreement. My name is on the physical lease. I am legally entitled to reside in this house. I have tenant rights. You cannot just strip me of my primary residence because of a personal disagreement. The courts will never allow it. I will fight this eviction." Sloane seized on his sudden burst of desperate energy. "Exactly," she shouted, stepping forward. "You think you can intimidate us with fancy paperwork? My father retains the best property litigators in the country. We will bury you in endless injunctions. We will tie this house up in litigation. You cannot simply throw him out onto the street." Jamal smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant legal smile. He pulled a single highlighted page from the stack and slid it across the marble toward Sloane and Derek. "You could tie up a standard eviction in court for months," Jamal agreed smoothly, "if you were a standard tenant. But you are a corporate leaseholder who signed a binding morals clause when Vanguard Capital Trust secured this property for you. Section 4 clearly states that any felony financial misconduct, including the embezzlement of corporate operating funds, constitutes an immediate termination of the master lease." Derek stared blindly at the highlighted paragraph. The words blurred together before his terrified eyes. "You stole $150,000 from your company payroll account today," Jamal continued. "You committed wire fraud. You breached your fiduciary duty. That instantly triggered the morals clause in your real estate contract. Your lease was officially terminated the exact second you wired that stolen money to the diamond broker. You are no longer a tenant. You are currently trespassing on my client's property. Patricia let out a loud wail. She grabbed Derek's arm, shaking him aggressively. Derek, do something. Tell him he is lying. Tell him you own this house. You promised me we were secure. Derek could not speak. He stared at the eviction notice, his entire world completely collapsing under the crushing weight of his own profound arrogance. He had built his identity on the illusion of self-made success, but the reality was that I owned every single piece of his life. I owned the roof over his head. I owned the capital in his bank accounts. I owned his company. Sloane backed away from the console table. Her designer heels scraped against the stone floor. She looked at Jamal, then at me, her eyes wide with total defeat. She realized her family wealth meant absolutely nothing in this room. She was outgunned. You have exactly 5 minutes to gather whatever personal items you can carry in your hands, Jamal announced, checking his heavy silver wristwatch. After that, I am instructing the local authorities to escort you off the premises. Any property left behind will be legally seized to cover the $150,000 you embezzled. Your time starts right now. Get out. Derek did not move. He stood frozen on the imported rug, his eyes darting frantically around the grand foyer, as if expecting a hidden camera crew to suddenly emerge and declare this a massive prank. Patricia let out a piercing shriek. She lunged toward Jamal, her heavy jewelry clanking wildly against her chest. "You cannot do this!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "I am a respected member of this community. I host the spring gala. You cannot throw us out like common criminals. Derek, call our lawyers. Call them immediately." Derek remained entirely paralyzed. The illusion of his absolute control had shattered so thoroughly that his brain could no longer process basic commands. Sloane, however, reverted to her lifelong defense mechanism. She tried to buy her way out. "Listen to me," Sloane demanded, stepping aggressively toward Jamal. "My father is William Kensington. He golfs with the mayor. He practically funds the police department in this district. If you make that call, I will personally ensure your firm loses every single corporate contract in this city. You will be disbarred by Friday morning." Jamal did not even blink. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone. He dialed a number with steady, deliberate movements. "My firm represents your father's primary holding company," Sloane Jamal replied, holding the ringing phone to his ear. "I know exactly how much debt he is currently hiding offshore. If you want to make threats, I highly suggest you consult your own legal team first." "Hello, dispatch. This is Jamal Carter. I am an attorney calling on behalf of the homeowner at 400 Oak Creek Drive. We have 3 hostile trespassers refusing to vacate the premises. The owner has a valid protection order and a terminated master lease. We require immediate police assistance." Sloane gasped, stepping backward as the reality of her powerlessness finally hit her. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger, the very asset that had triggered the morals clause, and suddenly seemed desperate to rip it off. Derek snapped out of his paralysis the moment Jamal finished the call. He let out a loud, chaotic noise, a mix of a sob and a growl. He bolted past me, his heavy shoes pounding against the hardwood floor as he sprinted toward the grand staircase. He had exactly 3 minutes left to salvage whatever personal items he could carry. "Derek, where are you going?" Patricia shrieked, watching her son abandon her in the foyer. "Do not leave me down here with these monsters." "I need my hard drives!" Derek yelled from the second-floor landing. "I need the hardware wallets!" He was panicking over cryptocurrency and source code backups, completely ignoring the fact that his mother and his wealthy fiancé were standing in the freezing entryway, waiting for the police. Patricia turned her furious gaze back to me. Her face was flushed, her breathing ragged. "You planned this," Patricia hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You sat there for years pretending to be a dutiful wife while secretly plotting to destroy my son. You are evil, Rachel. Pure evil." I took a slow sip of my wine. "I am simply a venture capitalist protecting my assets." "Patricia," I replied calmly, "you spent 7 years calling me a useless freeloader. You should be thrilled that I am finally taking an active role in domestic management." Heavy footsteps pounded rapidly down the stairs. Derek reappeared, clutching a black trash bag he must have grabbed from the master bathroom. It was stuffed haphazardly with a few tailored suits, a laptop, and his expensive watch collection. He looked completely disheveled, the very image of a ruined man. The flashing red and blue lights of two police cruisers suddenly illuminated the massive front windows. The harsh strobe effect bounced off the crystal chandelier, casting frantic, colorful shadows across the marble floor. Sloane let out a sharp cry of absolute horror. She rushed to the front window, peering out through the expensive silk curtains. "The neighbors are coming outside," she panicked, her voice pitching into a hysterical squeak. "The entire street is looking at us. We cannot walk out there with police escorts. My reputation will be completely destroyed. The board members live 2 streets over." Heavy, authoritative knocking echoed from the front door. Jamal stepped forward and pulled it open. 2 large uniformed police officers stood on the porch, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. Jamal calmly handed the lead officer the entire stack of legal documentation. The officer reviewed the heavily notarized eviction notice, the property deed, and the signed corporate breach form. "Are these the individuals?" the officer asked, gesturing toward Derek, Sloane, and Patricia. "Yes," Officer Jamal stated firmly. "They are illegally trespassing on my client's property. They have been asked to leave and refused." The officer stepped into the foyer. He looked directly at Derek, who was clutching his pathetic garbage bag like a lifeline. "You have 30 seconds to step off this property, sir," the officer ordered. "If I have to ask you twice, you will be leaving in handcuffs." Speed ramp. The camera instantly accelerates, blurring the frantic, overlapping screams of Patricia and Sloane as the scene shifts from standard time into a hyper-fast, chaotic montage. Their mouths move in rapid, desperate protests, but the sound is entirely muted, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thumping of an intense, escalating cinematic bass drop. The high-speed footage captures the police officers aggressively corralling the 3 intruders out the front door. Derek stumbles over the doorframe, nearly dropping his trash bag. Sloane wildly tries to cover her face with her designer clutch to block the view of the gathering crowd outside. Patricia flails her arms, her expensive pearl necklace snapping and scattering violently across the frozen concrete porch. The camera suddenly snaps back to brutal normal speed, the exact moment their feet hit the public sidewalk. The heavy bass cuts out instantly, replaced by the biting, freezing wind and the loud, overlapping murmurs of the wealthy suburban neighbors who have gathered on their pristine lawns. I stood perfectly framed in the grand doorway of my $45 million estate. The warm, golden light of the foyer spilled out onto the porch behind me, casting long, triumphant shadows. I leaned against the heavy oak frame, holding my crystal wine glass. Derek stood on the public sidewalk, shivering violently in the winter air. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with absolute crushing defeat. He was no longer the brilliant tech visionary. He was a homeless, disgraced fraud, clutching a garbage bag full of clothes, standing next to a sobbing mother and a furious, humiliated mistress. Sloane refused to look back. She marched aggressively down the street, her thin silk dress offering zero protection against the freezing temperature. She was frantically dialing her father, desperate to secure a luxury car service to rescue her from this suburban nightmare. Patricia stood frozen on the sidewalk, her hands covering her face, unable to process the total destruction of her social climbing ambitions. The neighbors she had proudly boasted to just yesterday were now whispering and pointing at her spectacular downfall. The 2 police officers stood firmly at the edge of the property line, watching the 3 of them walk away into the dark, freezing night. The flashing cruiser lights painted Derek's ruined face in alternating shades of red and blue. He took one final desperate look at the sprawling mansion he had falsely claimed to own. I raised my wine glass in a slow, silent toast. I took one final sip, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. Then, with smooth, calculated precision, I stepped back inside and pulled the heavy oak door shut. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place with a loud, satisfying metallic snap, locking the garbage entirely outside where it belonged. The first battle was completely won, but the true corporate bloodbath was scheduled for Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with the biting chill of a corporate execution. I sat in my expansive home office sipping a fresh espresso while watching the live security feeds from the Nexus Solutions headquarters. As the majority shareholder, I retained top-tier administrative access to the entire building network. The cameras offered a silent, brilliant front-row seat to the absolute destruction I had unleashed over the weekend. At exactly 8:30, Derek and Sloane walked through the revolving glass doors. They attempted to project their usual arrogant authority, dressed in sharp business attire holding expensive coffees. They expected to walk into a bustling hub of innovation, preparing for a massive initial public offering. Instead, they walked straight into a violent corporate mutiny. The lobby was packed with over 200 furious employees. The usual quiet hum of productivity had been replaced by aggressive shouting and raw panic. Derek tried to push his way toward the private executive elevators, but the lead project manager blocked his path, waving a smartphone directly in his face. Through the audio feed, the panic was crystal clear. The direct deposits had violently bounced. Every single employee paycheck had been rejected by the bank at midnight. Sloane snatched the microphone from the front reception desk, desperately trying to establish order. She shouted that it was merely a temporary banking error, a minor administrative glitch that would be sorted out before lunch. But the disaster was spreading faster than she could possibly lie. Derek managed to break away and sprinted toward the engineering department. He barged into the server control room, demanding answers from the lead technicians. The technicians simply pointed to the massive wall of monitors. The screens were flashing aggressive red warning banners. Their primary cloud hosting providers were actively terminating their enterprise access. Nexus Solutions relied on massive international server farms to keep their software operational. Without the required automated monthly capital transfers, the host servers triggered an immediate lockdown sequence. Derek shoved a technician aside and frantically typed his master administrative credentials into the primary console. Access denied. He slammed his fists against the keyboard, completely locked out of his own software empire. My brother-in-law Jamal called my private line. I put him on speakerphone, keeping my eyes locked on the security feeds. The withdrawal cleared globally. Jamal reported, his voice crisp and highly satisfied. The $600 million liquidity void hit their operating accounts like a massive financial earthquake. Every automatic payment, every payroll transfer, and every vendor contract failed simultaneously. The entire infrastructure of Nexus Solutions is completely paralyzed. I watched Sloane pacing frantically in the glass-walled executive boardroom, screaming into her cell phone. She was likely trying to reach her billionaire father to secure an emergency bailout. She had absolutely no idea the hole she was trying to fill was $600 million deep. The company was legally bleeding out, and the executive board was about to arrive. The heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open violently. 5 senior board members marched in their faces, carved from stone. Derek and Sloane immediately stopped their frantic pacing and scrambled to take their seats at the head of the long mahogany table. The room was soundproof, cutting off the chaotic screams of the unpaid employees outside, but the tension inside was thick enough to choke on. The chairman of the board, a ruthless veteran of Silicon Valley, did not even bother to sit down. He slammed a thick financial portfolio onto the table, his eyes locked onto Derek with absolute unyielding fury. Explain to me why our primary operational accounts currently hold a negative balance, the chairman demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Explain why I have vendors threatening federal lawsuits and our entire server grid flashing dark on a Monday morning. Sloane stood up quickly, smoothing her designer skirt in a desperate attempt to project authority. It is a temporary banking error, she stated, her voice tight but polished. We are experiencing a minor liquidity delay. My family is already wiring emergency capital to cover the immediate payroll. We just need 24 hours to clear the administrative block. Sit down, Sloane, the chairman barked, shattering her arrogant facade instantly. This is not a banking error. You are not facing a temporary delay. You are facing total annihilation. He turned the portfolio around and shoved it down the table until it stopped right in front of Derek. Our anonymous angel investor executed a total redemption of their 85% preferred equity. At midnight, the chairman announced, his words landing like heavy physical blows. Vanguard Capital Trust pulled $600 million out of our infrastructure. They effectively stripped this company down to its copper wiring. Derek stared at the portfolio, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. He looked up, his eyes wide with frantic confusion. They cannot do that. The initial public offering lockup period prevents major shareholders from liquidating without a 90-day notice. It is completely illegal. It is perfectly legal when the executive suite breaches their fiduciary duty, the chairman countered viciously. Vanguard Capital cited a direct violation of the corporate morals clause. They submitted documented proof of internal embezzlement involving the primary operating fund. Someone in this room stole $150,000 of company capital yesterday. Sloane dropped her gaze to the massive diamond ring on her left hand, suddenly desperate to hide it under the table. Derek swallowed hard, his throat tight with panic. He was entirely cornered, but his overwhelming narcissism refused to let him surrender to reality. "I can fix this," Derek insisted, slamming his hands flat against the mahogany table and leaning forward. "Vanguard Capital is just playing hardball to negotiate a better equity split before we go public. Let them walk. We do not need them. I will call our secondary venture partners. I will secure emergency bridge financing by the end of the day. Our software valuation is too high to fail. I can leverage my remaining founder shares as collateral to secure a massive loan right now." The chairman looked at Derek with profound, absolute disgust. "You are completely delusional," he stated coldly. "But go ahead and try, Derek. Secure your bridge financing. Because if you do not have operational capital in our accounts by Wednesday, the board will vote to dissolve this company and hand you both over to the federal authorities." The heavy boardroom doors slammed shut, echoing down the glass corridor as the chairman walked out. Derek was left sitting in the suffocating silence of his own making. Instead of accepting the catastrophic reality of his situation, his overwhelming narcissism kicked into overdrive. He convinced himself that the entire corporate crisis was a coordinated personal attack orchestrated by me. He genuinely believed I had simply hired Jamal to freeze his personal bank accounts and terrorize his company just to force a highly favorable divorce settlement. Derek stormed out of the headquarters, his mind spinning with frantic, paranoid delusions. He drove straight to a notoriously aggressive family law firm in downtown San Francisco. He retained a team of ruthless attorneys and immediately filed a frivolous, aggressive lawsuit against me for the dissipation of marital assets. He formally accused me of hacking his private bank accounts and illegally hiding his personal wealth to pay Jamal for legal intimidation. He demanded an emergency court injunction to force me to return money he never actually owned. But lawsuits required massive legal retainers, and Nexus Solutions was actively bleeding to death by the hour. The furious employees were threatening a complete walkout. The cloud server hosts were preparing to pull the plug completely. Derek and Sloane needed an immediate massive injection of capital to keep their corporate illusion alive and to fund their vicious legal assault against me. Traditional banks had already slammed their doors in Derek's face the second the Vanguard Capital withdrawal hit the financial newswires. Extreme desperation drove them into the predatory shadow market of private corporate finance. They approached a high-risk lending syndicate known for astronomical interest rates and lethal, unforgiving collection terms. Sloane and Derek signed a massive bridging loan to temporarily float the company operations and cover their aggressive legal war chest. To secure the exorbitant amount of capital required, they were forced to put up the only asset they had left. They completely leveraged their remaining founder shares. They pledged every single drop of their personal equity in Nexus Solutions as collateral. If they defaulted on the loan for any reason, the lender would instantly seize their ownership of the company. They firmly believed their upcoming initial public offering would easily cover the predatory interest rates. They thought they were executing a brilliant corporate maneuver. I sat in my home office later that afternoon watching the digital financial trackers update in real time. My secure phone chimed with an encrypted incoming call. It was Jamal. "I just reviewed the public collateral registry," Jamal announced, his voice vibrating with sharp, predatory satisfaction. "They signed the bridging loan an hour ago. They put up their entire remaining equity package as the primary collateral for the cash injection." I smiled, leaning back in my leather executive chair. The trap I had carefully constructed had just snapped entirely shut around them. They took the bait, Jamal said, the sound of him closing a heavy file echoing over the line. They leveraged absolutely everything. Buy the debt, I replied. I heard Jamal shift in his leather chair on the other end of the secure line. His keyboard clacked aggressively as he immediately opened a private legal terminal. The syndicate they used is called Apex Funding. Jamal stated, his tone sharp and entirely calculating. They are notorious bottom feeders. They specialize in predatory interest rates and rapid asset seizure. They do not actually want to hold equity in a tech firm. They just want a massive immediate return on their capital. If we offer to buy out the debt portfolio at a 10% premium, they will gladly sign over the entire contract by the end of the business day. I opened my own encrypted banking portal on my dual monitors. Do it, I commanded. Structure the purchase through a completely isolated subsidiary. Use a shell company that has absolutely zero visible ties to Vanguard Capital Trust. I do not want Derek or Sloan seeing my legal fingerprints on this transaction until the exact moment I tighten the noose. Jamal typed rapidly. I am spinning up Obsidian Financial Holdings right now. It is a dormant corporate entity I keep on standby for aggressive acquisitions. The paperwork will be heavily shielded. To Derek, it will simply look like his debt was sold to another faceless high-risk investment firm in a secondary market transaction. He will not suspect a thing. I need you to authorize a wire transfer for $42 million to cover the principal loan and the syndicate buyout premium. I did not hesitate. I typed the complex authorization codes into my banking terminal. A sum of $42 million shifted from my offshore reserve account into the holding accounts managed by Jamal's elite firm. The transaction cleared in less than 10 seconds. The capital is secured, I said, watching the confirmation screen flash bright green. Tell me about the specific terms of the bridging loan Derek just signed. What exact leverage did he blindly hand over to us? Jamal let out a low, predatory chuckle. It is an absolute financial suicide pact, Rachel. Derek was so desperate for rapid liquidity to stop the employee walkout that he barely read the required covenants. First, he and Sloan pledged their entire combined founder equity as primary collateral. That represents the remaining 15% of Nexus Solutions. And the secondary collateral, I asked, knowing predatory lenders never stopped at just corporate equity. They signed personal guarantees, Jamal confirmed, his voice dripping with lethal satisfaction. If the company defaults and the seized equity does not cover the remaining balance of the loan, the debt automatically attaches to their personal assets. Future earnings, real estate vehicles, future inheritance. The lender is legally authorized to liquidate their personal lives to recover the capital. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany of my desk. A cold, ruthless smile spread across my face. They practically handed me the deed to their entire existence. It gets better. Jamal continued, the aggressive tapping of his keyboard echoing over the speaker. Apex Funding included a standard but highly aggressive acceleration clause. The lender holds the absolute right to demand immediate full repayment of the entire loan, including all projected interest, if any financial misrepresentation or corporate fraud is discovered during the term of the lease. I looked down at the physical bank ledger sitting on my desk, the undeniable proof that Derek had secretly wired $150,000 from the company payroll fund to buy Sloan a massive diamond engagement ring. He had committed blatant corporate embezzlement just 24 hours before signing a multi-million-dollar financial contract. We already have the proof of financial fraud, I stated calmly. The engagement ring wire transfer is a direct, undeniable breach of the loan covenants. He lied on his corporate disclosures when he secured this capital. Exactly, Jamal said. The second Obsidian Financial Holdings takes legal possession of this debt, you have the absolute authority to trigger the acceleration clause. You can issue a margin call and demand the immediate repayment of $42 million. They do not have that kind of liquidity. When they inevitably fail to produce the cash in 24 hours, you legally seize their remaining shares and activate the personal guarantees. You wipe them out entirely. I turned my chair toward the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office, looking out over the manicured grounds of the estate Derek falsely claimed to own. He had spent the morning filing a pathetic, aggressive lawsuit against me for the dissipation of marital assets. He was paying his ruthless divorce attorneys using the very money he had just borrowed against his own throat. He believed he was fighting a brilliant legal war. He believed he was taking control of the narrative. Let the lawsuit proceed for now, I instructed Jamal. I want Derek to feel confident. I want him to believe his high-priced lawyers are actually intimidating me. Let him and Sloan spend some of their newly acquired bridging loan. Let them fix the server hosting issue and pay the furious employees. I want them to think they successfully survived the crisis. You want them to build their glass castle a little higher before you shatter it, Jamal observed perfectly, understanding my strategy. When people believe they have escaped the fire, they let their guard down. I explained, my voice chillingly even. Sloan will likely inject some of her own family money to stabilize the visual optics for the press. Let her waste her inheritance. Let Patricia brag to her country club friends about how brilliantly her son navigated a minor corporate setback. Let them all celebrate their fake victory. A sharp notification tone pinged from my computer speakers. I glanced at the monitor. Jamal had just forwarded the final digitally signed acquisition documents. The transaction is complete, Jamal announced, slamming a folder shut on his end. Apex Funding has officially transferred the entire loan portfolio. Obsidian Financial Holdings is now the sole proprietor of the debt. You officially own the leash to the remaining 15% of Nexus Solutions, and you hold the personal financial futures of Derek and Sloan in the palm of your hand. I opened the digital contract. I scrolled down to the final page, staring at the desperate, jagged signatures of my cheating husband and his arrogant billionaire mistress. They had arrogantly tried to throw me out of my own house. They had mocked my worth. They had treated me like disposable garbage. Now their signatures bound them directly to my absolute control. Excellent work, Jamal, I said, downloading a secure encrypted copy of the debt acquisition onto my private server. Keep your team on standby. Prepare the margin call documentation. I want the default notices fully drafted and ready to deploy at a moment's notice. We have the kill switch ready whenever you decide to press it, Jamal replied. Enjoy the view from the top, Rachel. I ended the call and set my phone face down on the desk. The sheer magnitude of my leverage was intoxicating. Derek thought he could abandon me and instantly upgrade his life with a wealthy CEO. He thought he could steal corporate funds, file aggressive lawsuits, and intimidate me into silent submission. He had absolutely no idea that every single move he made only tightened the invisible noose I had securely fastened around his neck. I had the power to end his entire career with a single phone call, but I was not going to strike just yet. I was going to wait for the absolute perfect moment to ensure his destruction was public, humiliating, and entirely inescapable. Over the next 3 weeks, that perfect moment began to assemble itself piece by piece. The massive bridging loan from Apex Funding temporarily stopped the immediate hemorrhaging at Nexus Solutions. The servers came back online. The furious employees received their bounced paychecks, along with a heavily fabricated corporate email from Derek blaming a third-party vendor for a minor banking error. To the outside world, the sudden crisis appeared completely resolved. But the predatory loan alone was not enough to maintain the aggressive illusion of a billion-dollar tech empire approaching an initial public offering. Sloan needed to project absolute financial dominance to calm the nervous board of directors. Sitting in my home office, I watched through the encrypted financial monitors as Sloan made her next profoundly arrogant move. She authorized a direct wire transfer of $12 million from her private family trust fund directly into the Nexus Solutions operating accounts. She labeled the transaction as a strategic founder investment. In reality, it was a desperate, expensive coat of paint applied to a rotting foundation. She was throwing her inherited wealth into a massive black hole, firmly believing she was purchasing invincibility. With the corporate accounts artificially inflated, Sloan went on a massive public relations offensive. 2 days later, a highly anticipated issue of Silicon Elite magazine dropped online and in print. Sloan was featured on the digital cover, standing shoulder to shoulder with Derek in their sleek glass atrium. She wore a sharply tailored white power suit. Derek wore his signature dark turtleneck. Sloane's left hand was strategically positioned to showcase the 5-carat diamond ring bought with stolen corporate funds. I sat at my mahogany desk drinking black coffee and read the feature article. It was an absolute masterclass in narcissistic delusion. The interviewer praised their dynamic partnership and asked about the challenges of managing a high-growth tech firm while navigating personal transitions. Sloane did not miss the opportunity to take a vicious, highly public strike at me. Building a unicorn company requires absolute synergy, Sloane was quoted in the bold, centerfold text. Derek and I share a relentless vision. For a long time, he was unfortunately held back by personal obligations that simply did not align with a high-performance lifestyle. When you are preparing for a massive public launch, you have to be willing to trim the dead weight. You have to aggressively cut loose the unambitious anchors dragging you down. We did exactly that. Now we are completely unstoppable. I read the quote twice, trimming the dead weight. She was proudly mocking the woman who had secretly funded her entire corporate playground. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I actually smiled at the bright computer screen. Sloane was building a magnificent, towering glass castle entirely out of her own arrogance. She was raising the stakes, inflating the public hype, and drawing the eyes of the entire financial sector directly onto Nexus Solutions. It was precisely what I wanted. The higher they climbed into the public spotlight, the more devastating the final impact would be. While Sloane manipulated the national media, Patricia was busy parading her perceived victory through the local high society circuits. Through the quiet, highly effective intelligence network Jamal maintained, I received detailed reports of my mother-in-law's daily activities. Patricia was hosting lavish luncheons at the Oak Ridge Country Club, treating the dining room like her own personal throne room. She sat at the center table surrounded by wealthy socialites and loudly bragged about her son's brilliant corporate maneuvers. According to the updates Jamal sent me, Patricia spent hours showing off the magazine spread on her smartphone. She boasted about Sloane's billionaire father, the upcoming initial public offering, and the elite social circles she was now officially entering. She gleefully told her affluent friends that Derek had finally discarded his useless suburban parasite of a wife. She claimed Derek had thrown me out onto the street with absolutely nothing and that I was currently begging for pennies, while his new fiancée prepared to take Wall Street by storm. Patricia was loudly staking her entire social reputation on a house of cards that I legally owned and was scheduled to demolish. Derek was equally emboldened by the sudden influx of Sloane's family cash and the glowing media coverage. He completely ignored the reality of the predatory bridging loan hanging directly over his head. He firmly believed his high-priced divorce attorneys were currently terrorizing me into submission. His legal team sent me a barrage of aggressive emails demanding I release his personal assets and surrender my claims to the estate. They threatened me with financial ruin. They threatened to drag my name through the mud in open court. They demanded I sign the original insulting settlement offer immediately or face total destruction. I forwarded every single threat directly to Jamal. Do not engage. I instructed him over a secure call. File the standard delay motions. Keep them completely tangled in administrative red tape. Let Derek pay his lawyers $1,000 an hour to scream into a void. I want him focused on fighting a phantom legal war while I prepare the actual guillotine. I spent the next several days walking the quiet halls of my sprawling estate. I ignored the chaotic noise of their celebrations. I ignored the magazine articles, the legal threats, and the social club gossip. I simply watched the calendar. I monitored the corporate spending of Nexus Solutions. With Sloane's $12 million injection, they were aggressively expanding their marketing budget, hiring new executive staff, and signing expensive luxury leases for their upcoming roadshow presentations. They were burning through their capital at an astronomical rate, entirely confident that the upcoming stock launch would cover their reckless spending. They were deeply, blissfully asleep. They were completely unaware that the countdown timer on their total destruction was rapidly approaching zero. I had the power to crush them at any second, but I waited with cold, mechanical patience. I needed them to feel utterly invincible. I needed the board of directors to be perfectly comfortable. I needed the trap to be so tightly wound that when the steel jaws finally snapped shut, there would be absolutely no possibility of escape. On a crisp Thursday afternoon, Derek and Sloane decided it was the precise moment to reward themselves for their fabricated corporate victory. Through the digital surveillance network Jamal maintained on their financial activities, I received a live alert. They had walked into the most exclusive, exotic auto dealership in downtown San Francisco. They were shopping for a victory lap vehicle. Derek had his sights set on a custom-ordered $300,000 sports car to park outside the Nexus Solutions headquarters. He wanted a highly visible, aggressive symbol of his impending initial public offering wealth. They strolled across the pristine showroom floor, exuding absolute arrogance. Sloane carried her designer handbag, waving her 5-carat diamond around as she pointed at various luxury models. Derek spoke loudly to the dealership general manager, dropping financial buzzwords and casually mentioning his status as a chief technology officer about to ring the bell on Wall Street. He demanded immediate service. He demanded the highest tier of VIP treatment. He demanded to sign a lease on the spot and drive the flagship vehicle straight off the polished showroom floor. The general manager, eager to secure a massive commission, ushered them into a glass-walled VIP closing suite. He poured them sparkling water and handed Derek the financing paperwork. Derek signed the digital application with an arrogant flourish. He pushed the tablet back across the glass table, leaning back in his plush leather chair with a smug smile. He fully expected the approval to be instantaneous. He firmly believed his fabricated media narrative and Sloane's recent $12 million capital injection made his credit profile absolutely bulletproof. The general manager took the tablet back to his main terminal to process the application. Derek and Sloane sat in the suite loudly discussing which Michelin-starred restaurant they would drive their new exotic car to for dinner. They were celebrating their absolute dominance. They were completely oblivious to the fact that I was currently watching the exact same credit inquiry trigger a catastrophic cascade of financial alerts on my encrypted home office monitors. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Derek checked his expensive watch, his initial smugness slowly morphing into irritated impatience. He hated waiting. He hated not being treated like absolute royalty. The general manager finally walked back into the VIP suite. He did not look eager. He did not hold a set of keys. His face was pale and he looked incredibly uncomfortable. He set the tablet face down on the glass table. "Is there a problem?" Derek snapped, his voice laced with heavy condescension. "Just run the application through your premium lending tier. My company is weeks away from $1 billion public launch. You are wasting my valuable time." "Sir," the general manager started clearing his throat nervously. The financing application was not just delayed, it was violently rejected by the primary lending bureau. Sloane let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Rejected? That is mathematically impossible. Run it under my name. My family has accounts with every major financial institution in this city. We are not leaving without that car." The general manager shook his head, taking a slow step backward toward the door. "Ma'am, the rejection did not come from our standard auto lenders. The application triggered a high-priority financial freeze. The system shows a massive active default code attached to your primary corporate entity. Your personal guarantees are currently locked under an aggressive asset seizure protocol. I am not authorized to conduct any business with you." Derek stood up so fast his leather chair crashed into the glass wall behind him. "Asset seizure," he roared, his face turning a furious shade of red. "What the hell are you talking about? My company just secured a massive bridging loan. We have millions in operating capital. Your system is broken." Before the general manager could respond, a sharp, piercing ringtone shattered the tension in the room. It was Derek's private cell phone. Derek aggressively pulled the phone from his pocket, preparing to ignore the call and continue screaming at the dealership manager. But the caller ID stopped him completely cold. It was the direct line for Apex Funding. It was the predatory lending syndicate that held the multi-million-dollar bridging loan keeping Nexus Solutions alive. Derek held up a finger, signaling Sloane to remain perfectly silent. He answered the call, putting the phone to his ear with a trembling hand. "This is Derek," he barked desperately, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. "Derek, This is the compliance division of Obsidian Financial Holdings, Jamal announced. His voice was crisp, mechanical, and entirely unforgiving. Please be advised that your original debt portfolio has been legally acquired from Apex Funding. Obsidian Financial Holdings is now the sole proprietor of your corporate bridging loan. Derek's eyes darted frantically around the room. Acquired? What do you mean acquired? I signed an exclusive covenant with Apex. You cannot just buy my debt without notifying the executive board. Jamal did not pause to acknowledge his panic. Furthermore, this call serves as your official legal notification of a margin call. We have executed a comprehensive audit of your recent corporate financial transfers. We have obtained undeniable documented proof of a severe breach of contract. Sloane stepped forward, her face draining of color. She grabbed Derek's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. What is it? She demanded in a frantic whisper. What are they saying? Derek ignored her, pressing the phone harder against his ear. Breach of contract, he repeated, his voice cracking violently. That is a lie. We have met every single liquidity requirement. We injected $12 million of founder capital into the accounts last week. Our operations are fully compliant. On Tuesday, Jamal continued delivering the fatal strike with lethal precision. You authorized an unapproved wire transfer of $150,000 directly from the Nexus Solutions primary operating fund to a private luxury jeweler in the Diamond District. This transaction constitutes felony embezzlement and a direct absolute violation of the loan covenants. Derek stopped breathing. The massive, beautiful showroom around him seemed to instantly disintegrate. Consequently, Jamal declared the acceleration clause in your master contract has been officially triggered. Obsidian Financial Holdings is calling in the entire remaining balance of the loan, plus all projected predatory interest effective immediately. You have exactly 24 hours to produce $42 million in liquid cash. If you fail to satisfy this margin call, we will legally seize your entire remaining equity package in Nexus Solutions and immediately activate the personal guarantees on all your private assets. Have a pleasant afternoon. The line went dead. A dial tone echoed loudly in Derek's ear. Derek slowly lowered the phone. His hands shook so violently the device nearly slipped from his fingers. The arrogant facade he had maintained for years was completely obliterated in a matter of seconds. The crushing, inescapable reality of his situation finally hit him. He had stolen money to buy a ring to impress a woman he thought would elevate him. Instead, that exact stolen money had just handed an aggressive, faceless financial firm the absolute right to slaughter him. Sloane shook his arm violently. Derek, she screamed, completely abandoning her high society composure. Tell me what they said. Derek looked at Sloane. He looked at the massive diamonds sparkling on her finger. He looked at the general manager who was actively gesturing for security to escort them out of the VIP suite. They issued a margin call. Derek whispered, his voice sounding hollow and entirely broken. They found the wire transfer for the ring. They know I stole the money from the operating fund. They want $42 million by tomorrow, or they are seizing the company and liquidating our personal lives. Sloane let out a loud, terrifying shriek. The sound echoed through the pristine showroom, turning the heads of every single customer and employee in the building. Her carefully constructed glass castle was violently crashing down around her, burying her under the weight of her own profound arrogance. The drive back to the Nexus Solutions headquarters was a blur of frantic, hyperventilating panic. Derek gripped the steering wheel of his leased sedan so hard his knuckles turned completely white. Beside him, Sloane was aggressively dialing every single wealth manager, hedge fund contact, and offshore banker in her extensive contacts list. Every single call ended in a harsh, immediate rejection. The financial sector is incredibly small, and news of a $42 million margin call spreads faster than a forest fire. No legitimate institution was going to touch a company actively defaulting on a predatory bridging loan. Derek refused to accept his impending destruction. His massive ego simply would not allow him to process failure. As they stormed into their corporate boardroom, he slammed his fist onto the mahogany table and demanded an emergency shareholder assembly. He ordered Sloane to rent out the grand ballroom at the luxury St. Regis Hotel for the following morning. He firmly believed that if he could just get all their minor shareholders and a few desperate venture capitalists into one room, he could pitch his way out of the crisis. He planned to dazzle them with fabricated charts, exaggerated revenue projections, and the promise of a massive initial public offering. He thought he could secure enough emergency capital to pay off Obsidian Financial Holdings and escape the margin call. Sloane immediately agreed. Her arrogant delusion perfectly matched his own. She wiped her tear-stained face, reapplied her expensive makeup, and began ordering their marketing team to construct massive presentation banners. They were going to throw a spectacular, flashy corporate event while standing directly on the edge of an active volcano. Patricia, hearing the news of the event, immediately hit the phones. She began loudly bragging to her country club friends that her son was hosting a private elite investment gala to unveil his latest groundbreaking valuation. In his manic, adrenaline-fueled state, Derek decided to make one final, incredibly stupid mistake. He wanted to feel powerful. He desperately needed to assert his dominance over the one person he believed was entirely beneath him. He called a premium courier service and arranged a special delivery to my estate. I was sitting in my home office reviewing the default protocols with Jamal when the heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the foyer. A uniformed courier handed me a sleek, matte black envelope sealed with the Nexus Solutions corporate wax stamp. I carried the envelope back to my desk and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a glossy VIP all-access badge for the Nexus Solutions Emergency Shareholder Assembly. Tucked directly beneath the lanyard was a handwritten note from Derek scrawled aggressively on his heavy custom letterhead. I read the note aloud so Jamal could hear every pathetic, arrogant word. Rachel, the note began. Tomorrow morning, I am securing $50 million in capital to finalize our public launch. Sloane and I are officially entering the billionaire bracket. I am granting you VIP access, so you can sit in the back of the room and watch me achieve everything you said I could never do. Attached is a revised divorce settlement. I have reduced your alimony by half. Bring a pen to the assembly, watch me win, and sign the papers. If you refuse, I will use my new capital to bankrupt you in family court. Do not embarrass yourself by begging. Derek. I placed the heavy cardstock onto my desk. A cold, genuine laugh escaped my lips. It was a beautiful, magnificent display of pure, unadulterated hubris. Derek was actively bleeding to death from a fatal financial wound, yet he was using his final breaths to brag about how much blood he possessed. He honestly thought he still held the upper hand. He believed I was sitting in my house, trembling in fear over his legal threats, utterly unaware that I was the exact executioner holding the axe above his neck. Jamal shook his head, a lethal grin spreading across his face. The sheer magnitude of his stupidity is an absolute gift, Rachel. He just invited the owner of his debt to a public assembly where he plans to commit active investor fraud by lying about his financial status. He is literally rolling out the red carpet for his own corporate slaughter. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The time for waiting in the shadows was officially over. I was going to accept his generous invitation. I was going to walk directly into his flashy, desperate assembly and completely obliterate his entire existence in front of every single person he was trying to impress. I walked upstairs to my master suite and opened the doors to my expansive walk-in closet. I bypassed the casual domestic clothing Derek was so accustomed to seeing me wear. I reached for the very back section of the wardrobe, pulling out a razor-sharp, custom-tailored power suit in deep absolute black. I paired it with a pristine white silk blouse and black stiletto heels that sounded like striking hammers against the hardwood floor. I pulled my hair back into a severe, sleek twist. I applied a bold, dark red lipstick. I looked into the full-length mirror. The quiet, accommodating suburban wife was completely dead. The ruthless venture capitalist had finally arrived. I walked back downstairs to the grand foyer. Jamal was waiting by the front door. He had traded his usual office attire for an imposing pitch-black three-piece suit. He held the thick leather briefcase containing the ultimate payload. Inside that bag was the undeniable proof of Vanguard Capital Trust, the full acquisition of the toxic debt, the documented embezzlement of the engagement ring, and the fully executed corporate morals clause. "Are you ready to drop the hammer?" Jamal asked, his voice low and vibrating with absolute authority. I adjusted my cuffs and looked out the front windows. A massive, chauffeured black SUV was idling perfectly in my wide driveway. The engine rumbled with quiet, intimidating power. "I am ready," I replied, stepping out into the freezing, crisp morning air. We walked down the steps and climbed into the luxurious leather interior of the back seat. The driver instantly secured the doors and shifted the heavy vehicle into gear. The tinted windows completely shielded us from the outside world. We pulled out of the suburban neighborhood and turned onto the main highway, heading straight into the heart of the city. Derek and Sloane were standing in a ballroom right now, preparing to pitch their fraudulent empire to a room full of eager investors. They thought they were about to secure their salvation. They had no idea they were about to look directly into the eyes of their own absolute destruction. The chauffeured SUV glided to a smooth halt in front of the St. Regis Hotel. A uniformed valet rushed forward to pull my door open. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement. Jamal flanked my right side, his grip firm on the black leather briefcase containing the financial execution orders. We bypassed the crowded main lobby and headed straight for the grand ballroom. Even through the thick, soundproof oak doors, I could hear the amplified sound of Sloane's voice echoing across the assembly. She was in the middle of her desperate, fabricated pitch. Jamal nodded at me. We did not hesitate. I pushed both heavy oak doors forward with absolute unyielding force. The heavy wood swung open and hit the brass wall stops with a resounding, violent crash. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the massive ballroom. Hundreds of heads snapped toward the back of the room simultaneously. The assembly was packed with minor shareholders, desperate venture capitalists, and the furious executive board members sitting in the front row. On the brightly lit stage, Sloane froze mid-sentence. The massive digital projection screen behind her displayed a glowing, completely fraudulent graph predicting $200 million in fourth-quarter revenue. She stood frozen at the podium, gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles were white. Derek was standing slightly behind her. He wore a brand-new custom-tailored suit, desperately trying to project the image of a secure, victorious tech founder. When his eyes locked onto mine, the color instantly drained from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk into his own funeral. I stepped into the grand ballroom. My black stiletto heels clicked aggressively against the polished hardwood of the center aisle. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, calculated precision of an apex predator circling its trapped prey. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. I wore my black tailored suit like armor. I radiated absolute, undeniable authority. In the front row, I spotted Patricia. She was dressed in her finest country club attire, ready to celebrate her son's fraudulent billionaire status. Her jaw dropped open in sheer horror as I marched past her. She shrank back into her velvet chair, terrified by the sheer force of my presence. Derek snapped out of his paralyzed shock. His overwhelming narcissism and desperate need for control forcefully hijacked his brain. He grabbed a wireless microphone from the presentation table and pointed a trembling finger directly at me. "Security!" Derek shouted, his voice cracking loudly over the sound system. "Security, remove this woman immediately. She does not have clearance to be in this building." Two large hotel security guards moved quickly from the side exits, stepping into the center aisle to block my path. I did not break my stride. I did not even look at them. "This is a private corporate assembly," Derek yelled into the microphone, turning frantically toward the audience of investors to save his fabricated narrative. "I apologize for the interruption, ladies and gentlemen. This is my disgruntled soon-to-be ex-wife. She is going through a severe mental health crisis and is trying to publicly embarrass me. Escort her out of the building right now." The security guards reached their hands out to grab my arms. Jamal stepped instantly in front of me. He completely blocked their physical advance. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold-embossed credential badge. He held it directly in their faces. I am senior corporate counsel, representing the primary shareholder of this organization. Jamal stated, his deep voice carrying a lethal, uncompromising authority that stopped the guards dead in their tracks. Do not touch my client. If you lay a single finger on her, I will personally ensure this hotel faces a massive federal lawsuit by the end of the business day. Step aside. The guards looked at the badge, then looked up at Jamal's imposing, unyielding expression. They wisely stepped backward, melting away into the shadows of the ballroom. I continued my walk down the center aisle until I reached the very front row. I stopped directly in front of the executive board table. The chairman of the board sat in the center seat. He was an older, ruthless Silicon Valley veteran who had threatened Derek with federal prison just 2 days prior. He looked at me with cautious, intense scrutiny. Derek rushed to the edge of the stage, still clutching the microphone. "Rachel, I am warning you," he hissed, dropping his voice to a desperate, threatening register. "I will destroy you in family court if you do not turn around and walk out those doors right now. You are ruining a $50 million capital raise. Get out." I ignored Derek entirely. I did not even grace him with a glance. He was completely irrelevant to the power dynamic playing out in front of him. I kept my eyes locked firmly on the chairman of the board. Jamal stepped up to the edge of the executive table. He placed his heavy black leather briefcase onto the polished wood. He unlatched the locks with a sharp metallic snap. He pulled out a thick, heavily redacted legal binder and slammed it violently down directly in front of the chairman. The heavy thud echoed through the silent, captivated ballroom. "Mr. Chairman," Jamal said, projecting his voice so every single shareholder in the room could hear the execution order, "my firm represents Obsidian Financial Holdings. As of Thursday afternoon, we are the sole proprietors of the $42 million bridging loan currently holding this company hostage. Furthermore, we are the legal proxies for Vanguard Capital Trust." A collective deafening gasp rippled through the audience of investors. The chairman of the board sat up completely straight, his eyes widening as he stared at the legal binder. Derek staggered backward on the stage. He dropped the wireless microphone. It hit the floor with a loud, piercing screech of feedback. He suddenly realized the catastrophic, inescapable trap I had built. The faceless, aggressive financial firm that had issued his margin call was standing right in front of him. "You have been actively soliciting investments today based on fraudulent revenue projections and hidden defaults," Jamal continued, tapping the heavy binder. "That constitutes a severe federal crime. We are officially seizing control of this assembly." The chairman of the board looked up from the legal documents. He looked at Jamal, and then he looked directly at me. He understood exactly who held the absolute power in the room. "Who exactly is Vanguard Capital Trust?" the chairman demanded, his voice thick with apprehension. I stepped forward, moving past Jamal to stand dead center of the executive table. The entire ballroom held its breath. The silence was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Derek was shaking violently on the stage above me, his face glistening with cold sweat. Sloane had backed away to the furthest edge of the platform, her designer heels hitting the back curtain as she desperately tried to escape the impending blast radius. Patricia was hyperventilating in the front row, clutching her chest as her entire world of unearned luxury completely shattered before her eyes. They had all played their parts perfectly. They had stolen, lied, and manipulated their way to this exact moment. They had confidently invited me here to watch them celebrate a massive financial victory. They expected a broken, defeated woman to quietly surrender to their absolute dominance. Instead, I had arrived to execute them. I looked up at Derek, letting a sharp, terrifying smile spread across my face. I opened my mouth to completely obliterate his existence. I reached across the polished mahogany of the executive table and picked up the spare microphone resting near the chairman. The heavy metal felt absolutely perfect in my steady hand. I turned my back to Derek and Sloane, facing the expansive sea of minor shareholders, venture capitalists, and eager media representatives who had gathered here today to witness a corporate miracle. Instead, they were about to witness a brutal financial massacre. My voice resonated through the massive ballroom, sharp, steady, and entirely devoid of mercy. "Good morning, I began, ensuring my tone reached every single corner of the cavernous space. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Rachel. Until a few days ago, I was merely the wife of your chief technology officer. That is the narrative Derek aggressively sold to all of you. He built his public persona on the lie of being a self-made corporate titan. He stood on this stage and promised massive returns on your investments. He asked you to trust his visionary leadership. He lied about his revenues. He lied about his bank accounts. Most importantly, he lied about who actually built this empire. I pointed a firm finger at the thick, heavily redacted legal binder Jamal had slammed onto the table. Inside that binder is the undeniable, legally certified documentation of Vanguard Capital Trust, one announced holding the gaze of the stunned investors. For 3 years, Vanguard Capital has acted as the anonymous angel investor keeping Nexus Solutions alive. We funded the seed round. We paid the server costs. We subsidized the bloated executive salaries. You all assumed Vanguard was a faceless Manhattan equity firm. You were wrong. Vanguard Capital Trust is a private, isolated financial vehicle. I am the sole founder. I am the sole proprietor. I am the anonymous angel investor holding 85% of this company. The silence in the ballroom shattered. A massive wave of shocked whispers and aggressive murmurs ripped through the crowd. Investors frantically texted their legal teams. The chairman stood up slowly, his eyes locked onto the heavily notarized documents Jamal had opened to the signature page. My signature. Derek let out a strangled, pathetic gasp from the stage behind me. No, he wheezed, stumbling forward until he hit the edge of the platform. That is a lie. You never had that kind of money. You are trying to ruin my initial public offering. Tell them you are lying. I slowly turned around to face him. His designer suit looked ridiculous on him now. He was a hollow shell of a man stripped of his stolen authority. I inherited a massive private estate 5 years ago, Derek, I stated, ensuring the high-quality microphone picked up every single crisp syllable. I kept it completely hidden from you because I knew exactly what kind of greedy, narcissistic man you truly were behind closed doors. I built a blind trust to completely protect my assets from your rampant, unhinged financial incompetence. I watched you strut around the city ordering luxury dinners, completely oblivious to the fact that you were spending my money. I gave you the capital to build this company to secure a stable future for us. But you took my investment and used it to fund your arrogant, deceitful lifestyle. Sloane shook her head violently, completely unable to process the total destruction of her elite corporate status. She gripped the wooden podium, her manicured knuckles turning bone white under the bright stage lights. She looked out at the sea of furious investors, realizing her entire corporate career was evaporating in real time. She had bet her entire future on a man who owned absolutely nothing. You triggered a massive liquidity crisis, Sloane yelled, her voice pitching into a shrill, desperate squeak. You pulled $600 million out of our accounts. You breached your fiduciary duty to the shareholders. We can sue you for corporate sabotage. I laughed. The sound echoed harshly across the ballroom, cutting through her pathetic legal threats like a serrated blade. I did not commit corporate sabotage, Sloane. I corrected her, my tone dropping to a lethal, unforgiving register. I simply executed a standard legal redemption clause. I removed my private capital from an organization actively being defrauded by its own executive team. And then I silently watched you panic. I watched you run to the shadow market. I watched you sign a toxic, high-interest bridging loan with Apex funding just to cover the payroll you bounced. Derek grabbed his chest. His breathing became incredibly rapid and shallow. He finally realized the scope of the trap. That is right, Derek, I said, taking a slow step toward the edge of the stage. The $42 million loan you signed on Thursday afternoon, the loan where you pledged your entire remaining equity package as collateral, the loan where you signed personal guarantees risking your future earnings. Apex Funding did not keep your contract. They sold it immediately. Jamal crossed his arms over his broad chest, projecting absolute ruthless dominance across the massive room. We acquired the debt through a private subsidiary called Obsidian Financial Holdings, Jamal announced to the silent, terrified room. My client is the absolute sole owner of that specific subsidiary. I looked directly into Derek's wide, panicked eyes. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. I held the leash to his company. I held the leash to his bank accounts. I held the leash to his entire future. You thought you could throw me out of my own house, I said, my voice echoing with terrifying absolute finality. You thought you could replace me with a billionaire CEO and walk away completely unscathed. But you never bothered to read the fine print. You never understood who was actually funding your fabricated reality. I stepped closer, tilting my head slightly as I delivered the ultimate devastating kill shot. I do not just own the house, Derek. I stated, my words falling like heavy stones into the dead silence of the grand ballroom. I completely own you. Derek collapsed heavily onto his knees. His legs simply gave out beneath him like severed strings. He hit the polished stage floor with a heavy, pathetic, echoing thud. He buried his sweating face in his hands, completely broken, completely exposed to the financial world, and entirely ruined forever. There was no way out. The brilliant tech mogul was officially dead. I stood over him, feeling nothing but the cold, absolute satisfaction of total justice. The entire ballroom remained perfectly still, captivated by the brutal financial execution unfolding on the stage. The minor shareholders watched in stunned silence as the illusion of their highly profitable tech unicorn completely evaporated into thin air. I turned my attention back to the chairman of the board. He was already nodding, fully understanding the absolute power I now held over his boardroom and his professional future. As the majority shareholder possessing 85% of the voting rights, I'm calling for an immediate binding shareholder resolution, I stated clearly. I motion to terminate the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Executive Officer, effective this exact second, for severe breach of fiduciary duty, corporate fraud, and gross mismanagement of company assets. The chairman did not even bother to call for a formal vote from the other executives. He looked at Derek with pure venom. The motion passes unanimously, the chairman declared loudly into his own microphone. You are both officially terminated. Your security clearances are immediately revoked. Your corporate access is permanently locked. Sloane let out a jagged, hysterical gasp. She grabbed the wooden podium, her knuckles turning bone white as she tried to physically anchor herself to a company she no longer controlled. You cannot do this to me, she screamed, her high society composure completely destroyed. My father will bury this entire board in litigation. I will sue every single person in this room for defamation and wrongful termination. The chairman laughed, a harsh, unforgiving sound. You do not have a case, Sloane. The board is filing a massive countersuit against you before the end of the business day. You signed off on a toxic bridging loan and allowed your partner to embezzle operating funds. You are personally liable for the missing capital. Your father's money will not save you from a severe federal investigation. Sloane whipped around to face Derek. The man she thought would elevate her into a billionaire power couple had just dragged her directly into a criminal fraud case. She ripped the 5-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger and threw it violently at his chest. The heavy ring bounced off his tailored jacket and clattered loudly across the wooden stage, rolling away into the shadows. Jamal stepped forward, picking up the final document from his black leather briefcase. He looked down at Derek, who was still kneeling on the floor, completely paralyzed by the rapid, violent destruction of his life. We are officially executing the morals clause buried deep in your original founding contract, Jamal announced, his deep voice leaving zero room for negotiation or debate. Due to your documented embezzlement of $150,000, you have triggered a fatal forfeiture protocol. Obsidian Financial Holdings is hereby legally seizing your entire remaining 15% equity package. You own absolutely nothing. Your net worth is mathematically zero. Derek stared blindly at the floor. He could not speak. He could not defend himself. He had played a dangerous, arrogant game, and I had systematically stripped him of every single asset he valued. Before Derek could even attempt to stand up, the heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open for the second time that morning. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed down the center aisle. 4 federal agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission marched aggressively into the room, flanked by two armed uniformed police officers. The crowd parted immediately, giving the authorities a wide, clear path directly to the stage. Derek, the lead federal agent, stated, pulling a folded legal warrant from his jacket. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and severe financial misrepresentation. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Derek slowly lifted his head. His eyes were vacant, completely shattered by the absolute reality of his federal indictment. He forced his trembling legs to push him upward. He stood on the stage completely defeated and broken. The uniformed officers stepped forward, grabbed his arms, and forced them roughly behind his back. The loud metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed sharply across the silent ballroom. It was the sound of absolute finality. In the front row, Patricia finally comprehended the sheer magnitude of the devastation. Her golden son, the brilliant visionary she had constantly used to humiliate me, was being walked out of a luxury hotel in federal handcuffs. Her prestigious country club friends would see his mugshot on the evening news. Her entire social climbing existence was brutally, publicly eradicated. She let out a short, breathless wheeze. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed heavily onto the carpeted floor in a dead faint. Nobody in the front row rushed to help her. Sloane stood shivering on the stage, surrounded by furious investors, actively demanding their money back. She was entirely stripped of her corporate power, facing endless civil lawsuits and the absolute destruction of her elite family reputation. She had gambled everything on a lying, narcissistic fraud, and she had lost everything. I did not stay to watch the police escort Derek out of the building. I did not look down at Patricia lying unconscious on the floor. I handed the microphone back to the chairman of the board. I picked up my leather handbag, turned my back on the wreckage of their lives, and walked down the center aisle. Jamal fell into step beside me, securely locking his heavy leather briefcase. The crowd of investors actively parted to let me through, looking at me with a profound mixture of absolute terror and deep respect. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and crossed the grand lobby of the luxury hotel. I stepped through the front entrance and out into the crisp, freezing winter morning. The bright sunlight hit my face, warming my skin. I took a deep, deliberate breath of the clean city air. The heavy, suffocating weight of the past 7 years was entirely gone. I was completely free, infinitely wealthy, and fiercely independent. I walked toward my waiting chauffeured SUV, leaving them to burn in the ashes of the exact fire they had started. Never mistake silence for weakness. When those you trust decide to stab you in the back, don't scream. Just quietly buy the knife. Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to become ruthless? Tell me how you took back your power in the comments below. The story of Rachel serves as a masterclass in reclaiming power, illustrating that the ultimate response to betrayal is not a chaotic outburst, but a meticulously calculated restructuring of one's reality. When faced with absolute deceit from those she trusted most, Rachel did not crumble into the passive role her husband and his mistress expected her to play. Instead, she stepped directly behind the camera, taking absolute control of the directorial vision of her life. By shifting the focal length from emotional devastation to tactical execution, she proved that true strength lies in silence and strategy. Every move she made, from the sharp macro focus on the financial ledgers to the sweeping 360-degree dismantling of Derek's fabricated empire, was executed with the precision of a seasoned director orchestrating a flawless climax. She systematically stripped away the artificial lighting of their corporate theater, exposing the fraudulent foundation beneath. The central lesson here is profound. When the supporting cast of your life attempts to hijack your narrative, you do not beg for your script back. You rewrite the ending, cut their screen time to 0, and let the natural consequences of their hubris play out in high definition. We must recognize that we are the sole executive producers of our own lives, holding the absolute right to recast, reframe, and rebuild our sets whenever the foundation proves toxic. True strength is found in that quiet transition from a helpless spectator of your own tragedy to the ruthless architect of your triumph. Take a moment to evaluate the actors in your own life's production. And tell us in the comments how you plan to rewrite your script to reclaim your absolute power.